distill some of those lessons learned from those many conversations, and just discuss some of the things that we've seen as far as strategies for incorporating skills into that talent lifecycle, where to begin, what are some of those questions that we can ask ourselves up front that will make things easier as we're working our way through this journey and working to become skills-based organizations. So as I begin here, feel free to submit questions, as was said, via the Q&A. I'll monitor for that. But as far as the agenda for today, first I want to start out with an introduction, kind of to what we're seeing as far as approaches to skills, a little bit of research around how effective skills are at implementing change within organizations. They'll also want to discuss hiring and mobility. So as far as thinking about that talent lifecycle and how skills fit within that talent lifecycle, where is it impactful to insert that kind of strategy? How can skills be incorporated into selection decisions, or how can skills be used as part of a talent audit? So we'll be discussing that. Also want to go into building a program. So specifically, as we're thinking about the tools that we use to build these skills programs, what are those specific tools? What are the strategies for incorporating those tools, and what should we be looking to do to ensure that we're utilizing some of those tools to the fullest as we begin to phase them in to these skills programs. And then I'll just close out with some final thoughts. So even before we get into the content here, I want to begin with a poll question. So the question really to level set here is, has your organization adopted a skills-based talent strategy for your business? So the different options are no, not at this time. We haven't really begun to adopt that. Second option is no, but we are actively seeking to adopt a skills-based approach as part of our roadmap. Or yes, we have created or adopted a skills framework, but we haven't yet incorporated that into the process. We're conceptually developing the framework, but not yet inserting it into these different talent initiatives. And then the last option is yes, we have a skills strategy and we're actively executing it within one or more talent programs. So between those four options, just where are you and your organization at as far as adopting these skills-based talent strategies? So if we could close that poll, I think that's probably enough time. We can see, and the results, as we can all see, 42% are saying no, not at this time. So that is where most individuals are responding here. And that's absolutely something that we would expect and what we've been seeing. As far as right now, there's a lot of energy around skills, but we're still at the pre-adoption point with a lot of organizations who are just starting to gain interest in skills, and starting to have some thoughts around how they might, adopt it, but not kind of formally seeking to adopt that yet. Second most frequent response here is not adopting yet, but actively seeking to adopt that. So 28% responding there. And then as we get down to these other options where there is some creation of a framework, we have 22% saying there's a framework but hasn't been executed yet. And then 8% saying there's a skill strategy that is actively being executed. And again, this is absolutely what we were seeing as far as this journey is something that's ongoing. And there's a lot of organizations that are just starting out in this journey towards becoming a skills-based organization. It's a journey that's worthwhile from what we're seeing in the market, and it's a journey that can be executed, but there's a lot of steps, there's a lot of change management, and there's some strategies that can be helpful along the way. So as we're moving forward, let's start out again with some of this background and research as far as why organizations are adopting this skills-based approach. So as we all know, organizations are rapidly changing, right? AI and automation is having an effect on what skills are most relevant in the workplace. And really the types of work that's being conducted with crowdsourcing and gig and where work is being conducted with hybrid and remote work, we've just seen such a rapid transformation for organizations and how work is being executed in the last few years. It's been a very rapid pace for some of these changes. And change is constant, but it's really the pace of the changes that we've been seeing in the past few years that has really led to this focus on skills. Beyond this rapidly evolving skills, focus on skills and skills that predict success, there's also this shortage of talent that we're seeing different organizations are facing. So talent pools for critical roles are shrinking. There's more employees retiring than there are who are joining the workforce. And with that, it really changes how we want to move candidates and move employees who are internal to the organization through the process and make sure that we are really highlighting the skills that those employees have and making sure that they're the best fit within the organization. And beyond that, there's really some interesting research from the World Economic Forum. So one of the main bullet points here that I'll direct your attention to is that third bullet point, and that's that there's literally 100 million people who are underutilizing their current skills. So they may have other roles to which they're a better fit within the organization. They may have skills that are not being utilized, and understanding what those skills are and where they might be a better fit is going to make the workplace and going to make organizations more effective. So with that combined with what we're seeing on the previous slide with the shrinking talent pools, it just becomes very important to focus on these skills. And what we know is that people are more than just their resume. So how do we get the most out of people? How do we make sure that we are not focusing on a list of past experiences, but instead understanding what might this person have to offer? What are some of those skills that they may not have had a chance to display previously professionally? And our employees are really the most important stakeholder as we're thinking about this skills shift, as they have some of these skills and there is some of this underutilization of those skills that will really drive dissatisfaction within different organizations. So macro shifts have really forced us to reevaluate work. And this is Josh Burson's work, so we can't take credit for this particular graphic, but what we're seeing is that historically, and as we all know, historically organizations focused on jobs. So here is a job description, here are the criteria for success for this particular job, and we're looking to see what person is the best fit for this particular position, and then we put that person to work. So it's very job-centric has been our approach historically. The new approach that we are, many organizations are shifting to because of those macro trends has been to be more work-centric or person-centric. So, here are the skills that an individual has. We want to understand what are those skills that that individual has, and also how will those skills fit within the organizations in that macro sense. So it's really a shift in how we view work and what we prioritize as we're approaching that work. And there's a lot of different areas in which we can focus. So you can see on the right in green, when we're thinking about reskilling or redesigning, recruiting, there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of different areas that organizations can prioritize as far as how they're thinking about incorporating skills into their overall journey and thinking about incorporating skills into their talent strategy. And with that complexity, it becomes difficult to know where to start. It really feels like getting started is the most difficult part of this skills journey. What is the initial focus? So before we get into that, let's get focused on some of the questions that we've heard from other organizations with which we're working. And one question that we're actually asking them quite frequently is trying to get focused on what they're trying to accomplish with their skills journey. So as we're asking them this, and trying to understand their strategy and their ultimate goal of incorporating skills into their different talent projects and programs, we tend to get one of three answers. And you can see those on the screen. And I'll say sometimes there really isn't consensus within the organization with regard to which one of these is most important. So it can be ongoing conversations to understand what is the priority here, what are we really trying to accomplish with this skills journey, and then what are the secondary factors that are driving our approach to incorporating skills into these talent programs. But what we see is one of three main areas. So first would be agility. And this is in regard to large organizational shifts, something that tends to be something that could be broad, like preparing for the future of work. So driving a true transformation based on business context, you need to adapt. You need to, increase the revenue per employee, or there's employee planning considerations, getting the total cost of workforce. So it is those more economic, perhaps is one way to put it, those more economically focused impacts that we're considering with that agility piece. Another consideration that we're hearing from organizations for why they're going down this path would be agency. So that is more employee focused. It's how do we inspire employees to deliver their best? How are we ensuring that employees are engaged? How are we ensuring that they're performing maximally, that we're putting them in the right positions so that they are going to be retained within the organization? So that's the employee-focused agency answer that we get sometimes. And then another important one is equity. So we do hear from organizations, there's a focus on this skills-based approach. With regard to equity, how do we fairly measure an employee's capability and do that in an objective way, focusing on their skills, focusing on, elements that may not have bias involved in them, or that will not have bias involved in them? How do we make sure we have that objective focus that prioritizes diversity and makes it more of a level playing field compared to some of the other decision-making criteria that might be involved in promotions or selection decision-making? So it tends to be one of these three areas, and sometimes multiple, but understanding which one is the priority has really helped us determine what's the best path forward, or what's a starting point, at least, for going down this skills journey. And this is a step, what we're seeing on the screen. This is a step that's often missed, and that's it's really the question around how disruptive should you be as you are beginning to incorporate skills into different stages of talent management or talent acquisition. And there's really a continuum that we see as far as how organizations are approaching this. On the left-hand side, we have a full-blown revolution where organizations are wanting to throw out job descriptions. They're focused on agility. They want to completely revamp old infrastructure. And it is across the employee life cycle, across talent acquisition and talent management, there is this complete shift in how these organizations want to view talent and run some of their talent programs. Compare that to the right-hand side of the screen, where we have more of an evolution, and that's where organizations are building on what they already have or augmenting it, making some minor tweaks to a few portions of their talent strategy. So it could be that, in addition to having job descriptions, we also add skills to those, as opposed to trying to remove sections of job descriptions or even remove job descriptions in their entirety. And wanted to give a few examples of this from conversations we've been having with different organizations. So as one example of a revolution, that an organization has been trying to do for their skills journey. We have a large technology company that we're working with that's based in Europe, and they've been much more focused on this revolution. So completely revamping across talent acquisition and talent management, making every single step in the process focused on skills. So the feedback that a current employee will get about their skills or about their, performance will be focused on skills. Their internal mobility will be based on skills. Hiring of new candidates is based on skills. It is a complete shift from where they were previously to this skills-based approach. Another example, on the other side of the spectrum, we're working with a large manufacturing organization, and they really want to solve for agency. So they want to focus on employees, and they want to make sure that those employees are, energized and engaged within the organization. So they started out with 1,500 job codes, and it was too many job codes for that size of organization or for the different roles that they had. Employees felt like there was really nowhere for them to go within the organization due to some of the academic requirements for some of these roles or due to some of the specificity of some of these roles. So the first step in working with this large manufacturing organization was really to start out with reducing the number of job codes. Let's simplify, let's find some of those common skills that will help us predict success, and across a few of these job codes and combine them, and really focus on those skills. And employees, when we're able to display those skills and simplify that job architecture, that job structure, employees really saw that there were the same skills in some of these newly created roles and some of these, combined roles. They're the same skills that they currently have. There's less of a focus on those academic requirements or on, particular certifications in some cases. It's more focused on those skills, and they felt a lot more mobile within the organization, effects on turnover and engagement. So just a few simple tweaks in our approach and incorporating skills into our models and in simplifying our job architecture can absolutely have an impact. So the main point of those examples is that not everyone needs to do a revolution. It's a journey, and sometimes, the end stage, the final phase might be a complete focus on skills. It might start out with job architecture. It might start out with, skills-based hiring. So that's really what we're seeing and trying to convey on this slide is that you can begin anywhere on the talent life cycle, and you can start small. Skills can support all of these different types of projects. So whether that be, skills-based hiring or talent mobility, upskilling, or succession planning, skills can help inform these types of decisions and these types of programs. But there, anyone can be an appropriate place to start. It's really a strategic decision about where is it easiest to get traction, and also where are there pain points currently, and how much of an evolution versus a revolution do we want to do for incorporating skills into our talent processes. So I'm going to pause here. There is a question, an open question. So how do organizations assess or know if these employees have skills, if the organization goes from only looking at education and actual work experience? So we're actually going to answer that in just a bit here as far as assessing skills and how do we get some objective information. So I'm going to put a pin in that particular question. The second question we have here, how would skills be integrated alongside a current core competency model? Where have you seen this be effective? And actually, I'm going to loop back to that one as well. And it's absolutely something where we often see hierarchical models. So if there is a competency model that's currently in place within an organization, skills can be nested underneath that. Skills can be mapped to that. There's a few different approaches. So I'll go into more details on that in just a few minutes here. So with that, let's move on to the next section. Let's speak about hiring and mobility within organizations and how skills are part of those processes. And really, how do we expand and how do we make skills important pieces of those processes? And it actually requires more intention and change management than a lot of organizations initially envisioned. In a perfect world, it would be a smooth shift. We'd be able to find candidates who have industry-specific degrees and who have the skills, but with all of these shifts in the world of work, with shrinking talent pools, it has been a necessary shift to a skills-based approach. And there have been a few difficult areas where organizations are getting stuck as we're making that shift with them to this more skills-based approach. So traditionally, you can see on the left-hand side here, we have those traditional external talent pools who have that industry-specific academic degree, their certification, or whatever the case might be. As we are making the shift towards focusing on skills, there is that increased focus in internal talent pools. Like, let's focus on these employees that might already be within the organization who have the relevant skills that would match with a particular role. And where we see a lot of organizations getting stuck here, as we look down to the green arrows, is the pre-application phase for those internal talent pools. So oftentimes, those internal talent pools might not be aware of where they can move within the organization because there's a lack of skill mapping. There's not transparency there. And not only is there not transparency, there might not even be anything to be transparent about because there's no mapped skills to different roles. There's not an understanding as far as what skills the candidate, or I'm sorry, the employee currently has that might be transferable to other areas within the organization. So even before the employee is looking at other positions, there's that sticking point of pre-application because there isn't that skill mapping. We also see some issues when we're thinking about those self-taught talent pools. So as individuals have gained experience and knowledge and skills in different areas, and they don't have that formal credential, they don't have that academic degree or whatever the case might be, those self-taught talent pools are being excluded because of inflexible criteria that are a part of the selection process. So job requirements being listed that may not be as necessary for certain roles, excluding these self-taught talent pools is having an impact, and it's difficult for organizations to move past that in some cases where there's just been such a history of having a narrow set of job requirements around particular roles. And then at the interview stage, it's really about embracing what people can do and being inclusive in that interview stage. We often see there's an impact to diversity in that interview stage where, for example, neurodiverse talent may not have the opportunity to demonstrate their skills as part of the interview process. It's really important to focus on that step and get rid of bias that can have an effect on some of these diverse talent pools. So how can we make the interview process inclusive? How can we make sure we're focusing on skills as part of those conversations and having as objective of an interview process as we possibly can? So those are just a few examples of where organizations are getting stuck as we're thinking about skills-based hiring specifically. But one of the focuses here is that second category with that internal talent pool. And on the mobility side, it's really surprising how much work we have to do here in order to make the best use of those internal talent pools. So this is just a graph showing in the past 5 years to what extent have organizations been making use of those internal talent pools, what percentage of roles are being filled internally. And this is really across the globe. And what we're seeing is there's really room for improvement here, right? So only about 25% of roles are being filled internally worldwide. And with the direction of talent pools and some of these macro trends that we're seeing with talent, it's going to be necessary to focus on those internal talent pools and have that number come up in order to really meet the market with that. To even further break this down, it's kind of benchmarked by industry, by region, by job family. We can see here in blue, there's an industry breakout, as far as what percentage of hires are external versus internal, some interesting trends with, energy and defense making really good use of internal candidates, tech and media, not so much. We also can break this out by region. So looking at APAC, EMEA, LATAM, and North America, kind of seeing where talent is more mobile internally within some of these regions, and in other regions, LATAM, where there's not as much use of internal talent, and some interesting considerations there. And then last, we have this job family view. So just thinking about for different job families, which job families tend to be making the best use out of that internal talent. Maybe a little bit less variation here, but just interesting to see some of these trends. So, across the board, you'll see in these numbers that no one is really getting it right. There's a lot of untapped talent within organizations that is probably more mobile than these organizations are making use of. And there's just a real opportunity to do some mapping, to build some skills frameworks, and to do some objective assessments and really help make that internal talent much more mobile. And if we're thinking about how should we advance skills based on mobility, we can really go back to where we started, right? To kind of loop back to that agility, agency, and equity piece. So if agility is what we're seeking to accomplish, then doing job architecture work, determining what skills are important, what skills will drive the organization forward, and then thinking about some of those build versus buy decisions, that's going to help prepare for the future of work and going to help with those, maybe some more of those economic considerations, those workforce planning types of considerations. So if agility is the focus, it's often initially focused on job architecture. If agency is what we're trying to focus on with these skills programs, if that's our ultimate goal, is that employee engagement and well-being and retention, then there's more of a focus on careers and learning pathways. So helping individuals see what are the skills necessary for some of those roles, helping them consider some of those lateral moves or thinking about where they might fit within the organization. That's going to be very impactful if the main focus is agency. And then for equity, there's a few different things we can do there, really removing academic and experience requirements, finding talent pools within the organization, really leveling the playing field there is going to be helpful, for organizations that are focusing on that equity piece. So let's move on and discuss, building a program. Once again, if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section. I see one just dropped in. So how does the skills-based approach define skills versus experience? What value does experience carry in a skills-based approach? And experience is absolutely something that is not going to be considered unimportant. We're actually about to get into the skills framework, and we can take a look at skills that are part of that framework and what might be considered a part of that framework, and how that might delineate from experience. So thanks for that prompt. I will make that delineation for going through this next section. Before we get into the next section, just a quick poll question once again. So for those of you that have taken steps towards a skills journey, what are those steps that you've taken so far? So that could be installing a skills-based technology solution. That could be creating a skills talent marketplace. Employees are self-reporting their skills into a database or system. or it could be leveraging objective skills assessment to collect skills-based intelligence. So several different approaches we're seeing for organizations that are beginning on their skills journey. So just interested to hear from this group, what are the steps that you have taken on the skills journey, if there are any that have been taken. So again, select all that might apply. We can close that one out and just get some ideas to where individuals are. And what we're seeing, 4% have been installing a skills-based technology solution, so a relatively small percentage. What we're seeing a little bit more of, 17%, are creating a skills talent marketplace. So kind of that more transparency around skills and their association with different roles. 58% are having employees self-reporting their skills into a database or system. So self-report is something we see quite a bit right now. And something we see with a lot of very technology-focused solutions is having that marketplace, having employees self-report their skills. And then the last option here is leveraging objective skills assessments. So we see 38% of you who responded are actually incorporating or leveraging those objective skills assessments as part of your processes. So as we're thinking about building a program for measuring skills and for utilizing skills across these different talent programs, want to start out with some thoughts on skills intelligence and how do we objectively measure those skills that individuals have, because that's an important piece of these talent programs. It's not only the job architecture and building skills into these job descriptions, but it's also understanding for those employees or for these candidates who are coming through the process, what skills might they have. And there's three primary ways that we see organizations are using in order to understand the skills that these individuals have. And the first one would be inferred. So this would involve, reviewing resumes, scraping information from that, just based on these past jobs. It's assumed that they have a certain set of skills. So it more than inferred from a list of experiences. The second one, and I'll skip to the bottom here, is the self-report. So this is where we have individuals go into a platform or respond to a survey, and they self-reflect on the skill that they believe they have and rate themselves. Perhaps it's on a scale of 1 to 5 with regard to how skilled they are in different areas. Helpful to have that information, but naturally there's going to be a little bit of distortion potentially with how employees or these individuals are reading themselves, as they may want to come across in a particular way or may want to exaggerate some of those skills we have. So the last option here is the assessed. So that's really focusing on objective and valid and fair measures of skills and proficiency. So having participants, employees, candidates go through a process where we're actually measuring their skills in a short and impactful assessment. Those could be behavioral skills, those could be technical skills, but actually asking them to demonstrate their skills in some way or psychometrically measure those skills. And what we see with that assessed approach is, while the ease of data capture may be a bit more, what we're really seeing is there's an increased value over time with that psychometric assessment approach, because we can have a lot of confidence in the information that we're collecting from these individuals. So actually assessing their levels of different skills and how they're likely to perform against those skills allows us not only to understand if they're going to be a good fit for a particular role, but also really helps us understand their mobility within the organization. And it's data that can be leveraged from more than one hiring profile or from more than one position within the organization. So it is that value over time of that assessed psychometric data that tends to be the focus of a lot of our current talent programming that we're supporting for leveraging and understanding employee performance and where they're likely to be a good fit within the organization. Now, as we're thinking about assessment and really as we're thinking about skills programs as a whole, it becomes important to have this consistent framework for talent mobility. And this is what we see really being critical to success of these skills programs is the starting point really is having a framework of skills. And oftentimes it's important to make sure that that framework is simple, it's easy to utilize. It's not hundreds and thousands of skills in some cases as there are in some, some taxonomies of skills. It's a focused and narrow view on the skills that, might be most impactful. Um, and you can see oftentimes we see organizations doing more of a hierarchical approach. So it may be that, we're not saying that everything across the board has to be in skills language, but it could be that there are some broad factors that are part of our company culture, like leading and deciding or supporting and cooperating, as you can see there in the lower right-hand side of the screen. Maybe that breaks down into competencies, and competencies can be helpful for us to understanding trends in performance or giving feedback on certain types of performance, whatever the case might be. So getting a little more specific with competencies. And then maybe the highest level of specificity would be the skills. So maybe we have a taxonomy or framework that contains 100 or so skills, and that's the granular level for understanding the skills that an employee has and mapping those skills to different roles. What we see a lot of organizations doing is they may already have a competency framework, and they're looking to incorporate a skills taxonomy with that framework. So it could be a mapping process to that existing framework, ensuring that there is an alignment between the two frameworks and almost looking, sometimes it's more of a nested model where here are the competencies that you already have incorporated in your organization. Let's do some work to align a new model of skills with those existing competencies, making sure that we are assigning skills to those competencies, breaking them apart when necessary to get specificity for different job codes, but not necessarily completely tearing down everything that's been done within an organization to identify what competencies or what is the culture that's important to that organization. So it's that hierarchical model. It's taking what might already exist and doing that mapping process. That tends to be where we see organizations having a lot of success. Now, as we're thinking about this approach, one thing that tends to be helpful is also thinking about talent mobility and how we approach that. So the overall goal of a lot of these talent initiatives, as organizations are launching them, is to really have employees and candidates to obtain information as far as their skills in different areas, and then also understand how they fit against different roles. So one approach to that is to, again, utilize an assessment solution, some kind of objective assessment that provides information on a series of different skills, but then look at those skills through different lenses, look at the skills against different profiles. So it could be that we have an employee coming into the organization, they take an objective assessment, it's a psychometric assessment, they complete that in relatively short amount of time, and we generate a report to see if they're a good fit for that particular position to which they're applying. It turns out they are, so we hire them into the organization, but maybe some months later, we want to provide them with a development plan based on their career aspirations. It's then being able to create that development plan against a different set of skills without having to go back to this new hire and ask them to provide additional information. Like, let's leverage that information we already have. Let's collect all of the skill data and understand how it looks through these different lenses against these different profiles. And that's where we're seeing programs have a lot of efficiency, and we're seeing programs gain a lot of traction where we can actually do that, where it's, let's assess the employee once, then let's look at them through these different lenses. Let's generate multiple different types of reports, because the initial assessment collected all the relevant information. So it is that approach, that flexible approach, where we are seeing organizations have a lot of impact and make the best use of employees' time and get the most data out of those assessments. Now, another thing that we're seeing here, another effective tool that organizations are leveraging as they're building these skills programs is to really utilize online dashboards for talent mobility. So what that means is, as we are understanding the skill level of individuals within our organization, how do we then look at that at an aggregate level and understand the trends within our organization as a whole, understand the trends within different geographies of our organization, understand different job families or reporting structures. Let's be able to dynamically look at that information and see where are there groups with strengths in particular skills, where are there opportunities, how can that feed into our overall talent strategy? Do we need to have more group development activities around leadership because there's a gap there? Do we need to focus selection efforts on getting individuals who can execute strategy or whatever the case might be, wherever there might be that shortcoming, or even more granular decisions? So do we want to assign a particular individual to be a mentor because they really excel in an area where the group might have some deficiencies or might have a little bit of a gap? So across the spectrum, we can really be strategic about how we use that data or get very specific as we're thinking about some tactical decisions that can be made based on this the information that we're getting. The key is being able to access it, to aggregate it, and to view it in a dynamic way where we can understand what's happening for the organization as a whole and within different groups and help feed that back into the strategy. So we're about to get into final thoughts. Just pause again for questions. So would values fit into broad factors? Potentially. I think there's some different vernacular there that might some different labels, but oftentimes we do see organizations mapping their values either to competencies or to broad factors. And it depends on kind of the level of specificity of those values. And then another question here, we use the OPQ, would this be considered a skills assessment? And the answer to that is the OPQ often measures results, often measures at the competency level. There is a more specific assessment that will capture the skills, a more granular view of the skills that predict success. That is the global skills assessment that is used specifically to capture those skills, highly similar to the OPQ as far as the candidate experience, just more specificity in those items and the results that are generated from that assessment. All right. So let's move on to some final thoughts. So yeah, I really like the survey that I saw from Deloitte. And so wanted to just pull this up on the screen and think about some of the organizational barriers that organizations are facing as they're beginning to try to work through how they implement this skills journey, thinking about the change management along this process. And what you can see here, we really color-coded the responses here as far as what are the top barriers that organizations believe that they have in transforming to skills-based organizations. And what we see is that the biggest focus here is really on operational barriers. So perhaps there's a legacy mindset, there's that existing structure, there's existing practices that are making it more difficult to shift to this skills-based organization. Compared to agility or technology barriers, those are secondary, still important considerations here, but a lot of the difficulty in making the shift in an agile way is just all of the existing structure around, again, job architecture, compensation, or whatever the case might be, which is why in those situations, oftentimes organizations are taking more of that evolutionary approach to tie it back into that, making some minor tweaks. Let's begin to insert skills to our existing structure and then phase our approach and build upon that. So interesting to see just objectively what organizations are seeing as their largest barriers in transforming to a skills-based organization. We also, or I should say, Deloitte also asked individuals, what would they view as the barriers to letting an employer collect skills data about them. So really what would make them more open. And what we saw in the response was that to color code these, in green, those are the responses that indicate that it's more of an approach. They're inspired by the idea of a skills program. They're inspired by the thought of career growth with the implementation of a skills program. And in the gray, we have concerns. So concerns about how data would be used, concerns about the fairness of the approach. So you can almost break this apart into, for asking employees, are there anxieties about a skills-based program, or are there is there excitement about a skills-based program? At the moment, there's more anxiety than excitement, and I think that's important for us to understand and to shift. It really highlights the need for transparency, because the shift should be based on a valid assessment. It should be based on a fair process. The goal of this is to increase equity and to help this data be used in a fair way. And we want to make sure that we're inducing excitement in employees in these organizations as opposed to increasing anxiety around how their data might be used. So to tie back to this table that we saw near the beginning of the presentation and just speaking to next steps, really what we see as being effective in a majority of cases is starting small. There's a lot of different areas in which skills can be incorporated in an organization. Let's start small. Let's focus on something that is achievable and something where there is a current use case for skills, something that is an evolution. Really, skills-based hiring is a natural starting point. Again, as we're thinking about that employee lifecycle, incorporating a skills-based assessment into the selection process can be a very easy way to get a foothold as we're thinking about building a skills-based program. Additionally, there can be a focus on prioritized roles. So as opposed to trying to approach a skills-based program from a global or organization-wide context, let's determine what's the critical function, what's the most important job family, and you could say pilot, or let's really start the project there. And with that starting point, use that as a stepping stone to move on to broaden the program. But an initial focus on prioritized roles, or one prioritized role even, can really help gain traction and be a proof of concept. And then also, what can also help make this feel more achievable for organizations is focusing on current state. The ultimate goal of this skills approach is to understand the future of work and to be ahead of it. But as a starting point, it is still helpful to understand what are the skills that are currently predicting success within the organization. Let's use that as a stepping stone. Let's understand what skills are aligned with particular roles. Let's help employees be more mobile. And then we can layer on top of that and kind of fluidly add in some of the skills that might be more important for a future state as we, again, grow and advance the program. So we're tackling some really big concepts here all at once. It's easy to get stuck, but focusing on some of these more tangible steps can absolutely be beneficial. And then just in closing, we would say that it's really worth doing this. We've seen organizations have tangible positive outcomes from incorporating a skills-based approach into their processes. 63% more likely to achieve results than those that don't adopt skills, 100%, 107% more likely to place talent effectively, 98% more likely to have a reputation as a great place to grow and develop. So it's all these proof points that shows that skills is worth doing. And it's something where as we incorporate these programs into organizations, we're seeing these positive results. It is about finding that starting point, and it is about approaching the program with the end state in mind, but not trying to bite off more than you can chew, and understanding what is the ultimate goal here. What's the pain point? Is the ultimate goal to increase employee satisfaction and to give them agency? Is the ultimate goal, equity? Is the ultimate goal something more economic? There's a lot of different decision points, but at the end of the day, this strategy, the map is there. It's a lot of change management to go through the journey. And we wish you all the best in doing this work. If there's anything that we can do to support your skills journey, please do let us know. And with that, I'll hand it back to Rhonda, HR.com. Thank you all so much for your time.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. Excellent presentation. And to everyone for joining us, we thank you so very much as well. If you were in live attendance here in Zoom and you've been here for the whole webcast, you will receive an email with your HRCI and your SHRM credit within 2 business days. As well, whenever I close the session out, just give me one quick second. I'm going to pop this in the chat. There is a link to an exit survey just now in the chat. However, when I close out the session, it will pop open in a new browser on your computer. Just take a moment to fill that out. Your feedback is super important to us at HR.com and of course the presenter and the folks at SHL. And I think that is everything. I want to also say thank you to those watching from the live stream, our social channels. And if you would like to view this and receive the credits, you can log in to HR.com as well. And with that, if you have come late and you want to view it again, you can view the recording on HR.com. I have also, for those in attendance, put a link in the chat. We are very fortunate to have another SHL-driven webcast on June 11th, the same time, the same place at 11 o'clock here. Unlocking Potential, the Power of Skills-Based Approach to Early Career Hiring and Development. You can find that in the upcoming webcast at HR.com to register for it. And then as well, if you're in attendance here, there is a direct link. So you can take the time to just register for that once we close the session. All right, again, thanks so much, Dan. Have a fantastic day.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take great care.